Your kindness is destroying you, and you don't even realize it yet. Every day you wake up tired, aching with a heaviness you can't quite name, only to dress it up with a smile that feels increasingly painful to wear. People say you're gentle, generous, a soothing presence they can't live without. Yet behind closed doors, your softness is slowly turning against you. You sit alone at night, feeling the crushing weight of the silence you've created by giving yourself away, over and over, to people who rarely pause to ask if you're drowning. You've grown numb to the betrayal of your own heart, because kindness was always supposed to heal, not wound. But Machiavelli saw through this cruel paradox centuries ago. Your generosity has become your darkest vice, a secret addiction that others praise without knowing it's consuming you alive. Every time you silence the voice that begs you to say no, every moment you swallow the rage that rightly demands expression, your soul fractures a little more. You confuse goodness with compliance, strength with silence, compassion with surrender. A recent psychological study from a leading U.S. university revealed that high levels of self-criticism, emotional rigidity, and eventual burnout are all connected to an inability to show yourself the same compassion you offer everyone else. Your kindness, when withheld from yourself, traps you in cycles of invisible suffering, a relentless inner exploitation that pushes you further into emotional collapse. There's no heroism in silently breaking yourself apart to keep the peace. There's no virtue in becoming a sacrificial offering to a world that rarely returns your favor. Nietzsche once bitterly observed that beneath every sweet, accommodating nature lies an unspoken fear, the fear of rejection, abandonment, and appearing weak. You've built your life around avoiding these terrors, but at what cost? Your relentless goodness hasn't given you control. It has robbed you of it completely. It has chained you to the approval of others, made you dependent on external validation, and rendered you helpless in the face of even minor disapproval. This is the sobering truth you've resisted facing. Your kindness isn't pure altruism. It's your subtle attempt at emotional survival. Yet that very survival mechanism is what's slowly killing you, piece by delicate piece. And here lies the darkest irony of all. The very thing praised as your greatest virtue is the same force that silently poisons your spirit. So tell me, how long until your carefully hidden pain becomes impossible to bear? How many more nights will you endure this quiet unraveling? All because you confused gentleness with invisibility, strength with silence, kindness with self-neglect. Because the truth, painful and liberating, is staring you in the face right now. Your kindness isn't saving you. It's breaking you down, quietly and mercilessly, until nothing remains but the hollow shell of who you once were. They call you kind. Always the calm one, the understanding one, the one who never causes trouble. You carry like a badge of honor, being agreeable, being useful, being good. But deep inside, there's a quiet ache that grows louder every time you say yes when you want to scream no. That ache has a name. It's the self you keep abandoning to maintain the illusion that being kind will somehow save you from rejection, judgment, or isolation. This is the invisible cycle no one talks about. The way you slowly erase your needs to earn love. Not because you're noble, but because you're scared. Scared that if you stop pleasing, they'll stop staying. Scared that your worth is conditional on your ability to soothe, serve, and sacrifice. And so you keep giving, keep smiling, keep shrinking. You don't offer kindness freely. You offer it compulsively. And that's the difference. Compulsive kindness isn't a virtue. It's a survival mechanism, a learned behavior rooted in old emotional debts you were never supposed to carry. Maybe it started in childhood. Maybe someone taught you, directly or through absence, that love had to be earned, that comfort was conditional, that your pain didn't matter unless it was invisible. So now, every interaction becomes a performance. You shape-shift. You anticipate needs before they're spoken. You apologize for having boundaries. You comfort people who never ask how you're doing. And the world rewards you for it, because your suffering makes their lives easier. But what happens when kindness becomes the mask you can't take off? When your need to be good suffocates your right to be real. This is the hidden weakness behind your kindness. You don't know how to tolerate the discomfort of being misunderstood, disliked, or seen as selfish. So you choose silence over confrontation, surrender over truth, peace on the outside, chaos on the inside. And slowly, your identity dissolves, not in one dramatic moment, but in 1,000 small concessions. You forget what it feels like to choose yourself. You start to believe that denying your needs is just part of being a better person, but it's not. It's the quietest form of self-abandonment, and it's killing you more than any external rejection ever could. You don't need to stop being kind, but you need to stop bleeding for people who only know how to take. You need to learn that saying no is not cruelty, it's clarity. That disappointing others is sometimes the only way to remain loyal to yourself. That you were never meant to be a vessel for everyone else's comfort while you drown in your own silence. This is the real cost of your compulsive kindness, the slow, unspoken erosion of your authenticity. You don't lose yourself all at once. You vanish line by line, smile by smile, until one day you look in the mirror and realize you become a stranger who exists only to be agreeable. If this truth echoes something you've never dared to say aloud, like this video, subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you imagine. You are goodness like armor, polished, 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 until even you forget there's something underneath. You've mastered the role, the one who listens, the one who forgives, the one who never disrupts the peace. But here's the fracture. Your peace is fake. It's curated, controlled. It exists only as long as your true self stays out of sight. This is not kindness. This is a performance, a moral persona designed not to connect, but to survive. Carl Jung warned that the persona is the compromise between who you are and what the world expects you to be. But when that compromise becomes your identity, something inside begins to starve. You stop being human. You become a mirror reflecting what others want to see. And with each reflection, your own outline fades. You smile when you're angry. You comfort when you're hurting. You agree when every cell in your body screams disagree. Why? Because you've confused being good with being obedient. Because somewhere along the way, you learned that expressing your truth risks abandonment. And so, you traded your power for acceptance. But here's the cost no one sees. Your shadow doesn't die just because you ignore it. It waits. It gathers weight. Every suppressed feeling, every silenced truth becomes another knot inside your psyche, pulling you further from wholeness. The more you cling to being the good one, the more you exile the parts of you that don't fit that image, your rage, your boundaries, your clarity. And this exile isn't without consequence. You become emotionally fragmented. You feel hollow, disconnected, unreal. You catch glimpses of yourself in moments of truth, when you say something too blunt, when you withdraw without explanation, when resentment leaks through your smile. And it terrifies you, not because it's wrong, but because it's real. Your persona was never supposed to replace you. It was supposed to protect you temporarily, but you've worn it for so long it fused with your skin. Now you don't know where it ends and where you begin. You mistake numbness for calm. You mistake politeness for peace. But deep down, your soul is screaming for a rupture. Not to destroy, but to finally rebuild. This is not about choosing between kindness and cruelty. It's about choosing between illusion and integrity. The person you pretend to be is praised, but the person you really are, the one behind the mask, is the one who needs liberation. And that liberation won't come from being good. It will come from being whole. Even if it means being misunderstood, even if it means being judged, because your moral persona doesn't make you safe. It just makes you invisible, and you were never meant to be invisible. They think you're calm, controlled, emotionally balanced. But the truth is, your kindness isn't peace, it's panic dressed in soft tones. You smile not because you're okay, but because the idea of conflict terrifies you. You stay quiet not because you agree, but because you fear being seen as difficult, demanding, or, God forbid, disappointing. Your sweetness is a defense, a shield, a silent strategy to avoid the sharp edges of human interaction. Nietzsche would say, it's not virtue, it's fear, refined and rehearsed until it looks like grace. But underneath it all, you're suffocating. Behind your gentle tone is a storm of what you never say. Behind your silence is a scream that you've trained yourself not to hear. You've come to believe that kindness is control, that if you're soft enough, agreeable enough, pleasant enough, no one will leave. No one will raise their voice. No one will make you feel unsafe. And for a while, this works. You get the approval, the praise, the temporary calm. But peace built on suppression isn't peace. It's pressure. And pressure over time breaks. You're not avoiding chaos. You're internalizing it. Each time you silence your truth, you absorb the emotional tension that others should have carried. Each time you downplay your needs, you inflate the illusion that you're unaffected. You think you're managing the room, but really, you're just abandoning yourself quietly so that no one else has to feel uncomfortable. And what does this create? Emotional constipation, inner paralysis, a life where you're always calculating, always adjusting, always translating your feelings into acceptable versions until you forget what unfiltered truth even feels like. You live in a cage made of approval. Every bar is a smile you forced, a boundary you dissolved, a moment of discomfort you swallowed to keep the surface smooth. But there's a cost. Kindness as control turns you into a prisoner of other people's perceptions. You can't relax. You can't breathe. You're constantly watching yourself, managing your tone, curating your reactions, editing your presence. You've mistaken this vigilance for strength, but it's just fear in formal attire. Here's what you need to understand. Being emotionally real will never make you weak, but pretending to be fine forever will. Because the kindness that isn't rooted in truth is just self-erasure with a pretty name. You don't have to be sweet to be safe. You don't have to smile to be strong. And you sure as hell don't have to earn your worth through emotional submission. Let go of the illusion. Let it crack. Let people see the version of you that's done performing. Because that version, the one who says what hurts, what matters, what's real, isn't cruel. It's free. You think you're being good. That your selflessness is a sign of strength. That your instinct to help, to comfort, to be needed, makes you noble. But what if it doesn't? What if your endless giving isn't love, but submission? What if your generosity is not a reflection of your power, but the camouflage of your fear? It's hard to admit this, isn't it? That much of what you call altruism might be self-betrayal. You're not helping because you have energy to spare. You're helping because you're terrified of what happens when you're no longer useful. This is the brutal truth of pathological altruism. It looks like compassion, but it functions like control. You give so you won't be left. You care so you won't be questioned. You sacrifice so you won't be seen as selfish. But inside, you're exhausted, bitter, numb. There's a study that calls this out, showing how excessive, compulsive altruism leads not to connection, but to depression, guilt, and emotional collapse. And still, you keep doing it. You keep abandoning your needs for others. Why? Because the idea of not being needed feels like death. Because without your usefulness, you don't know who you are. You've built your identity around being the one who always says, I'll handle it. But that identity is a trap. Every time you rescue someone, you abandon the part of you that needs rescuing. Every time you overextend, you reinforce the belief that your worth is tied to how much you can endure. And no one questions it, because your pain makes their lives easier. Because the world rewards those who disappear politely. But you feel it every night when the silence settles and no one needs you for a moment. That ache, that sudden emptiness, that's not loneliness. That's the consequence of giving so much that there's nothing left to hold yourself up. You've confused being selfless with being powerless. And you've used kindness as a sedative to avoid the deeper fear that you might not be loved if you ever stopped giving. But love that requires your exhaustion isn't love. It's dependency. It's control wrapped in flattery. It's manipulation dressed as admiration. Real love doesn't need you to bleed to prove you're good. It asks for your presence, not your sacrifice. So ask yourself, honestly, who are you when you're not being needed? Who are you when you're not performing usefulness? If that question terrifies you, it's time to stop giving as a way to survive. Because the version of you that only exists to serve is not your highest self. It's your most hidden cry for freedom. You answer quickly, with a smile that's almost automatic. You soften your tone. You measure your words. Not because you're peaceful, but because the idea of disapproval sends a shiver through your chest. Every pause in someone's voice, every delay in their reply, becomes evidence that something's wrong with you, that you failed the invisible test of being acceptable. You're not kind because it's your essence. You're kind because you're afraid of what happens if you're not. This is how the approval trap tightens its grip. Not suddenly, but slowly, until you confuse performance with personality. What people see as warmth is often just survival dressed in politeness. What they call grace is you bracing for rejection before it even happens. This didn't begin as strategy. It began as adaptation. The child who learned that safety comes from being easy to love, easy to handle, easy to predict. So now, you over-accommodate. You anticipate needs before they're spoken. You offer emotional labor no one asked for. You dissolve your preferences before they form. All to avoid the thing that terrifies you most, being seen as difficult. Or worse, being left. But there's a hidden cost. Each time you prioritize approval over truth, you shrink. You hand fragments of yourself to others, hoping they'll build a version of you that's worthy enough to keep. And what remains? A shell, a carefully managed persona, a life curated around avoiding discomfort. And still, you're exhausted. Because perfection doesn't earn protection. No matter how gentle you are, no matter how selfless, someone will eventually disapprove. And when that happens, your entire emotional scaffolding shakes. Because your worth was built on sand. This is where the deeper pain lies. You've made likability your lifeline. You've mistaken being palatable for being loved. And the more you invest in maintaining that image, the less room you have to breathe, to assert, to exist without apology. It's not just exhausting, it's dehumanizing. Because what happens when your needs finally scream louder than your fear? When your silence becomes too heavy to carry? You lash out. You withdraw. You collapse. Not because you're weak, but because the mask became too tight. And here's the truth that stings. People don't truly know you. They know the version you offer to remain included. But the real you, the raw, opinionated, sometimes inconvenient you, hasn't been given a voice in years. That's not humility. That's self-erasure. Your emotional triggers aren't signs of brokenness. They're signals. They're calling attention to the fact that your life has been dictated by how you're perceived, not how you feel. And that gap, that's where your anxiety grows. That's where the emptiness creeps in. You think you're maintaining peace, but you're maintaining a prison. Because freedom isn't found in being agreeable. It's found in being authentic, even when it rattles the room. Stop rehearsing your humanity. Let it show. Let it disrupt. Because only when you risk being misunderstood do you finally start to be seen. You don't need to yell to reclaim yourself. You don't need to argue, justify, or convince anyone that you've had enough. The moment you begin to reconstruct your emotional authority isn't loud. It's quiet. Almost imperceptible. But something shifts. You stop explaining. You stop over-apologizing. You stop softening truths that deserve to be sharp. This is what reclaiming power looks like. Not an explosive confrontation, but in a silent return to structure. And Machiavelli understood this far before psychology gave it language. True strength doesn't come from constant war, but from knowing when not to react. From choosing where your energy goes. From designing your inner world like a fortress, not to keep love out, but to stop self-betrayal from entering. You were trained to be open, always available, emotionally accessible at any hour. But openness without structure is exposure. It leaves you drained, manipulated, misunderstood. The world doesn't protect the undefended. It uses them. So now, something different must emerge. Think of your emotional power as architecture, not armor. A place within you that's solid, not rigid. Boundaried, not cold. A space where not everyone is allowed to enter. Not because you're cruel, but because you finally understand that not everyone deserves access to your center. It begins with silence. Not the kind rooted in suppression, but in decision. You no longer react to every trigger. You don't chase clarification. You don't beg to be seen correctly. You choose stillness, not as surrender, but as sovereignty. From this space, kindness becomes choice again, not compulsion. Presence becomes offering, not obligation. Love becomes mutual, not sacrifice. And here's what that fortress looks like. It looks like walking away without explanation. It looks like not answering a message that dishonored your time. It looks like saying, I'm not available without guilt. It looks like holding space for your own discomfort without rushing to fix someone else's. This isn't emotional distance. It's design. Machiavelli wrote of fortresses not as places of isolation, but of leverage. And in your case, the fortress isn't about walls. It's about clarity. You no longer allow others to negotiate your worth. You no longer perform your value in exchange for peace. You build a core that holds, even when the world misreads you. Because if you want real presence, real depth, real healing, you have to start protecting your emotional structure with the same devotion you once gave to everyone else's comfort. And no, not everyone will understand this change. Some will call it selfish. Others will try to test it. That's part of the process. Let it happen. Because your job is no longer to be understood by those who benefited from your absence. Your job is to become so internally aligned that misunderstanding doesn't shake you. That rejection doesn't define you. That silence becomes a place of power, not punishment. This is your return, not to noise, but to weight. Not to approval, but to coherence. Not to constant giving, but to sacred containment. You are not a resource. You are a structure. Start living like one. Carl Jung said it plainly. The shadow you refuse to face doesn't disappear. It takes control. And as you look back now, with clearer eyes, you begin to understand what that means. Every time you silenced a truth to protect someone's feelings, every moment you swallowed your frustration to appear composed, every time you chose to please instead of disrupt, you weren't being kind. You were being ruled by the unspoken parts of you, the anger that never had space, the boundaries that never found form, the identity you buried under layers of morality and expectation, all in the name of being good. But the truth is that goodness was designed to keep you domesticated. It wasn't your essence. It was your survival strategy. You learned early that love could be lost if you were too loud, too direct, too real. So you shaped yourself around acceptability, sacrificing authenticity in the process. And the world applauded. They praised your generosity, your grace, your emotional strength. But none of them saw the cost. Nietzsche said something that echoes now like a secret you've always known. The fatigue you carry isn't from life. It's from living in contradiction. From bending yourself into shapes that feel nothing like home. From playing a part that earns validation but robs you of clarity. And that's what this has been all along, a performance. A carefully constructed version of you designed to keep the peace, hold the relationships, protect the illusion. You called it maturity. They called it virtue. But it was pain. Pain with a soft voice and a pleasant face. Pain you didn't know how to name because the world kept rewarding it. And now, finally, something in you is tired of being praised for disappearing. You're not angry at the people who benefited from your submission. You're angry at the silence that kept you loyal to a life that didn't fit. You're angry at how long you pretended to be fine. At how long you convinced yourself that being needed was the same as being seen. But there is no more pretending. The kindness that once kept you safe has turned into a cage. The emotional availability that once made you proud has become a funnel of exhaustion. And the morality you used as a shield now feels like a leash, one that tightens every time you smile through the ache. This is not a call to become harsh. It's a call to become whole, to reclaim what you've abandoned in the name of being likable, to rebuild the parts of you that only ever asked for respect, not approval. And it starts in silence, not passive silence, but strategic silence, a silence that no longer explains, no longer apologizes, no longer softens itself to keep the peace that only exists when you erase yourself. If this brought something to the surface, if it cracked open even one layer of what you've been hiding, leave a comment. Subscribe. Help me keep this space alive for those who are done pretending. Because as Jung reminded us, freedom isn't perfection, it's integration. And maybe now, finally, it's time to stop performing your goodness and start embodying your truth.